Hey, how you doing? I'll get that later. Hey, I want everybody to just say tacos out loud. 1, 2, 3. Oh, man, those were good. Those were so good. And it is Father's Day weekend, so happy Father's Day to all you dads out there, all you who are watching online. Happy Father's Day to you, too. Yeah, I know Father's Day is on Sunday, but this is the first of our weekend services, and it's Father's Day for us. So happy Father's Day to you guys. Jeremy was right. I did an amazing job introducing our series last week. It was Jeremy last week, and he did a great job. And it's funny, like sitting there, if you've read through the Bible a few times, you may have had this reaction. I'm listening to him, and I'm like, man, he's doing such a good job. And I'm like, but how could you skip that verse? Like, how could you skip that verse? Like, well, there's 6 chapters, and there's like 35 minutes, and we're going to have to skip some things, right? But I thought he did an amazing job kind of starting the whole thing off. And as it just so happened, like we didn't put it together this way. We just like randomly put these letters in different weekends. I wanted this letter, 1 Timothy, I wanted it Father's Day weekend for a reason, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I didn't think about how it followed up on the book of Ephesians. Because really what's going on is the church in Ephesus got started in Acts chapter 19. Can somebody go over there and help them be quieter, please? That would be a huge help. Thank you. I'm glad they're having a good time too, but it's distracting me. I don't know if it's helping you guys at all. We had this in Acts chapter 19, this whole thing got started called the church in the city of Ephesus. And what really happened was Paul spent a lot of time there. He spent a couple of years there. And what was so transformative about the church in that place was, it says that there's this one point where they come together and they bring all of their books that were about sorcery and witchcraft and all this kind of stuff, and they just had this huge bonfire and they burn them. And it's literally like worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Like there's such a radical change going on because how Jesus has gotten a hold of these people. They are so transformed that it changes the city. And then there's a riot that breaks out because of this change and how it affects the local economy. So that's the church at Ephesus. That's how it gets started. Paul writes the letter to the church of Ephesus. That's what we looked at last week. And then we advance a few more years, and you come to 1 and 2 Timothy. And the reason we're still talking about the city of Ephesus, the church here, is because Paul told one of his companions who was traveling with him those 10,000 miles, like Paul on one of his first missionary journeys, he picks up this Timothy guy, and he starts going with him. He's a young man, but he goes with him, and he's a huge part of Paul's team. And so now at this point, Paul says to Timothy, I need you to go back to Ephesus, because there's some false teaching going on, and I need you to get there. I need you to bring some leadership to what's going on. I need you to help what's going on so that this can be right. So he sends him back to this church at Ephesus. Fast forward, we're not even going to get to the book of Revelation in this series, but the church at Ephesus shows up again in the book of Revelation, chapter 2. It's the first church of 7 churches that Jesus addresses, and he says to them, you're doing so many things right, but you've lost your first love. This church that started off so amazingly made such a difference. In fact, when Jeremy talked about the church at Ephesus last week, they really didn't have huge problems. He was literally just encouraging them, man, you are on track. You're doing the right thing. Just remember these things. Our beliefs should impact our behavior. And we fast forward a few years, and now there's some false teaching happening. You fast forward a few more years, and they've lost their first love. And so there's a lot going on in 1 and 2 Timothy about church leadership, but I'm going to tell you my angle, and I'm just going to be up front with you. We're going to deal with church leadership stuff in another letter that Paul writes. I wanted to talk about 1 Timothy this weekend, on Father's Day weekend, because of the relationship that Paul had with Timothy. And I want us to hear it through this lens that while Timothy wasn't a biological son of Paul, he literally calls him my son of the faith. Now, his faith began, like we find out in 2 Timothy, from his grandmother and his mother. But Paul was this major influence of this mentor to this young Timothy. And then Timothy now becomes a pastor, and he sends him to this church at Ephesus. And he is literally like leading him, encouraging him, helping him. And I want us to see some things that he does from that context, because I think we can all maybe relate to that. Like maybe there's somebody in our life that we could look to, maybe who's a little bit younger than us, maybe who's not quite far enough along in the journey, maybe as much as we are. And they could be older than us, but they're new in the faith, and we can actually then reach back and help them and show them some things. Like all of us have somebody that maybe we can help in those ways. And maybe the verse in 1 Timothy chapter 4, in this little letter, the verse that kind of like shows us what Paul is doing for Timothy and how he's going to do this is found in verse 12. Let me just read that now, and then we're going to go back and kind of work our way through. But 1 Timothy 4:12 says this: "Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity." That verse was really important to me in my younger days in ministry. I became the pastor at Community when I was 27 years old. And I was young, and I was green, and I had no clue what I was doing. And they still asked me to be their pastor. And so we started into that journey. And I had one of my elders at the time. His name was Jim Shockney. He was one of the guys that helped start this church. And if you know the whole story, here's the quick version. A group of people from another church in town started Community because the church they were a part of did nothing to reach young people. And they wanted to be a church that reached young people. So a group of retired people left that church to be a church that reached young people. Now, maybe you can figure this out for yourself, but a group of retired people is not a magnet for young people. They had the right vision. They just didn't know how to go about it yet. And then eventually they called me to be their youth pastor. And then a few years into that, then I became their pastor. And then the whole heart, the whole vision was still, we want to reach young families. We want to reach young people. We're right across from a high school. We want to make a difference in this community for the younger generation. And so when I read through 1 Timothy, I actually hear it with that lens too. Like, what are we going to continue to do for those who are younger than us? How can we help them out? And so that was kind of like a theme verse for me. Well, anyway, this Jim Shockney, who helped start this church and was one of my elders at the time, he said to me, "John, you have everything going for you except age." He says, "When you need that, just give me a call." And so every now and then I just call him up and say, "Hey, could you call so-and-so?" And I still remember the day I turned 30. I thought, this is so awesome. Now I'm 30 and I have experience like I'm old. I remember thinking that when I was 30. I'm sorry, but I thought that way, right? Speaking of old, maybe you remember this song if you're old. "Teach your children well." It was like Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young came out with that in 1970. It was written out of the torment and stuff of the 60s and just saying, hey, I'm watching kids. How do we teach them in the midst of cultural chaos, right? Well, I'm going to just tell you now. I'm going to show you a video in a second. I'm going to tell you now. You don't have to be, my age to help somebody who's younger. You could be a teenager and help somebody who's younger. You could be in elementary school and help somebody who's younger. You could be 2 years old, 4.5 months. That's how old my granddaughter is. And she's already teaching her little brother about Jesus. Watch this.
Yes. Jesus loved me, so I know. So the Bible tells me so. Let him right be right long. They love me, but he is strong. He's old piggy's mama.
So let me translate the end. Gook means look. It's like, look at his long piggies, mama. That's how she ends the song. Anyway, there is a spot in that. I've watched that thing like 100 times, and I cried half of them, but I watched that thing over and over and over. And when you're supposed to sing, Jesus loves the little children, she literally says, Jesus loves little Wyatt. And that's when she kisses him. And I'm just like, You can be 2 years old and help somebody who's younger know about Jesus. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at how Paul encourages Timothy, and I want us to make the translation into our life. You know, it may not be somebody who's a pastor of a church. It may not be somebody who's like in a staff position in a church. It's just somebody who's younger. How can we encourage them in their walk with the Lord? And there's a few things that really come up big in Paul's writing to Timothy in both letters, but I'm going to highlight some of them this week. So here's the first thing. I just want you to get 3 things this week. Okay, here's the first thing. He teaches them about encouragement and faithfulness. He wants to encourage his faithfulness. There's faithfulness to this message, and that's the reason he was sent to Ephesus. There's false teaching going on. And so he says, I want you to make sure you are protecting this message. Be faithful to the message that we gave them in the first place, the message about Jesus. And it's not based on their works, and it's not based on this religion over here, and it's not based on this kind of thing that they've picked up from the culture, and they're throwing it in there. If you read the first few verses, that's what he's alluding to. But he says in verse 5, listen to this, the goal of this command, the command is, I want you to go, and I want you to make things right doctrinally. He says the goal of the command is love, which comes from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Now, before we get to that sincere faith, I was going to spend some time on that. I really like that idea. The command is all about love. The goal here is love. And I think when we teach about Jesus, it should produce people who love people. It shouldn't produce more Pharisees. When we teach Jesus, it shouldn't produce more legalism. When we teach Jesus, it shouldn't produce more conflict. It actually should produce more love. It doesn't mean we avoid truth, but remember, Jesus was full of grace and truth. He dealt with truth, but always like in a loving way. But he says this comes from, like this is how we're going to see it. This is how we're going to know. It comes from a pure heart, good conscience, and a sincere faith. That word sincere, you know, like it means authentic. It means it's the real deal. And so it's possible for somebody to know and to talk in church terms. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody talk church. Like they have that Christianese, we call it, like that church jargon, and it just rolls off their mouth, and they could literally cuss and swear in 1 second and turn around, and then just like they have these church words, and you're like, it's almost impressive, but it's just a facade. Because no, this is a sincere faith. This is what he's encouraging them to do. Have this sincere faith, like it's the real deal. It's this faithfulness to Jesus that literally impacts every category and area of my life. And so he gets really practical with Timothy throughout this book. I want you to just see a few of them. One of the things is I think there's a faithfulness to the way God wired us. And so he says this to Timothy later on in chapter 1. Listen to verse 18 and 19. It says, Timothy, my son, I'm giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by recalling them you may fight the battle well, holding on to faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and have so suffered shipwreck with regard to their faith. So again, there's some stuff here about faith, but notice what he says, because I'm giving you this command in keeping with these prophecies. Now, we don't know what the prophecies were. We really don't. We speculate that they were about this mission. They were about his leadership in a church. They were about like somebody at some point had told him, I see God working through your life in this way. And so he's wanting him to be faithful to that. But really, here's another way to say it. He wants him to be faithful to the way that God wired him. Like we get to 2 Timothy, he says, again, these guys laid their hands on you. They prayed for you. Like you have been given gifts, man. Serve in relationship to those gifts. The things that God made you good at. That's how I want you to serve. Be faithful to the way God wired you. Another thing he talks about is being faithful in prayer. In chapter 2, he says this in verses 1 and 2. He says, I urge then, first of all, the petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. Back on Inauguration Day, back in January, I did a 60-second with PJ, one of my daily devotional things, and I just said, I read that verse, and I just said, we're supposed to pray for our new president. We're supposed to pray for the leaders in our city and our state. And I had somebody who commented on there that was really angry, and I said, I can't pray for that president because I know this is what he's done. This is who he's been, and this is what he's done, his criminal activity, and I have proof of it. Blah, blah, blah. And so, fortunately, not all of that happened on the stream there. Like they private messaged me about some of that stuff, and I just gently said, well, the early Christians were called to pray for like Nero, You think you could pray for Biden now? Nope, they couldn't. Well, we're called to. He never says if you like them or you like their politics or you like the way they lead. Just like, no, it's our job as followers of Christ to pray for those who are in positions of leadership. Our city mayor, Carly Mayer, goes to our church, and she actually stopped by today. We have an area pastors group that meets every Thursday mornings, and a bunch of us from different churches. She and her husband stopped by and just asked him for prayer. And so we prayed over her. You know, I don't know all of Carly's political positions. I've never even had those conversations with her. But she longs for prayer. And I think whether a leader is a Christian or not, whether they acknowledge the power in prayer or not, it's our job to pray, and we need to be faithful in that. And I don't know, maybe some of the issues that go on in our culture is because Christians aren't praying, because we're not, as the Bible talks about, to be prayerful and watching. You know, it's like watching for ways that we can respond and even answer some of those prayers ourselves. But faithful in prayer, no matter what. Another thing I think he talks about really throughout his letter to Timothy is being faithful to what is best. And I'm going to come back and say this again, but let me just say it now too. There's a lot of good things that we can do, but sometimes the good things can distract us from the best things. And so he says, I want you to be faithful to the best. Listen to this. 1 Timothy 4:8. Yes, I skipped completely over chapter 3. Some of you are like, oh, what about that? That's how I felt last week when, Jeremy's teaching through Ephesians. How could you just skip that verse? That's a great verse. So you don't have time to hit them all. And chapter 3 has a lot to do with church leadership, and we're going to deal with that when we get to another letter. So I'm skipping over it. Verse 8 in chapter 4. For physical training is of some value. So he's saying it's a good thing. Physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. When I read that, I'm reminded of Jesus' words when he says, I came that they may have life more abundant and full. Listen to it again. It's this promise is just not just for the present life, and it's for the life to come too. It's like, see, a lot of times as Christians we think, we're not citizens, we're citizens of heaven, but there is better for us here if we'll just listen to God, if we'll just obey God. That doesn't mean life's going to be easy, perfect, nothing like that. But he said, you know what? If we'll follow and obey God, there are mental benefits now. There are physical benefits now. Did you know that in the Bible there's a command that says, thou shalt not worry? It actually comes up several times, even if you don't read in the King James, don't like thou shalt not. Like he says, don't worry. He doesn't say be happy. That's a song. Anyway, he says, don't worry. He says, pray. Don't worry. Bring it to me. So if we would actually do that, we would have less stress. Do you see the emotional, even the physical benefits of like obeying God? So he's saying, if that's the best thing is godliness, the best thing is pursuing this relationship with him. If that's the best thing, don't let the good things derail you. Let me tell you, a lot of the good things in life are very good, but sometimes they can become our gods. I've seen people make their family their God. Do I love my family? Absolutely. Michelle and I were having this conversation this week about talking about some people, not talking about anybody in particular, by the way, nobody here. Don't be all stressed out about that. We were just talking in general about our culture, and we're like, how do we tell somebody sometimes, like, to love your kids doesn't mean that your kids are everything. When you make the kid the center of the universe, guess what happens when they grow up? They think they're the center of the universe, right? And so it's like somehow we got to figure out what's the best. How do I get godliness in my family? How do I get godliness in my career? That's a good thing. Supporting my family, providing for them. We're going to talk about that. That's a good thing, but we can let those things derail us from the best thing. So he says, be faithful to the best thing. Like even physical training is a good thing, but it's nothing compared to godliness, pursuing that relationship with Jesus. Another thing he says later in chapter 4 is like a faithfulness to purity and integrity. Listen to this in verse 16. He says, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. It's not just us on the line, is it? It's every person watching us. I remember when I made some major changes when I was in high school, and I shifted gears from like having one foot in the world and one foot in the church, and I said, okay, God, I'm all in. I remember that shift, and I remember some of my friends who were this part of the world who for a little bit there literally were making fun of me. Because like if I were to slip up and I were to say a word that I used to say, but I kind of quit saying, and I told them I didn't want to say that word. If I said that word, they're like, "Aw," like they didn't have a problem saying it in every sentence. But if I said it, they would come after me. Why? Because they were watching me. So he says, you watch your life because other people are watching your life. You and your hearers, those who are watching. Man, is that true of little ones or not? More is caught than taught when it comes to kids. And we can have the greatest speech in the world about honesty. But if they're not watching us be an honest person, that's the speech they're listening to. And so he says, watch this closely because it's going to save both you, but also those who are your hearers, those who are watching you. That's what he says. So we're going to be faithful. And that's what he's encouraging, this kind of faithfulness in all these practical areas. Here's another thing, though. He encourages responsibility. Encourages responsibility. And a lot... trust me, a lot could be said about responsibility being taught to the generation that's growing up now. Like if I just open it up, we could be here for like hours. Well, what about this? What about this? What about, like for example, I think it needs to be taught that the responsibility, part of responsibility literally is teaching people that if you're not going fast, you should not be in the left lane. I mean, that needs to be taught, and it's just not being taught, right? I'm driving up the highway the other night. I'm where the 15 and the 215 split. I get off on the 215. There's 2 lanes, and then it turns into 3, and this truck just goes vroom, right in the left lane. And he was going 50, and everybody's passing. I'm like, why did you have to get over there? It's like, nobody taught him. But we're not going to get into all those things. So here's what we're going to do. We're only going to stick to a couple things that show up in 1 Timothy. Otherwise, we could literally be here all night if we're talking about all kinds of random things about responsibility. Again, being responsible as a church leader is what chapter 3 is about. But we skipped that. All right, so in chapter 5, I want you to pick this up. Verse 8, he says, anyone who does not provide for their relatives and especially for their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Can I get an amen? Everybody's like, that's kind of a scary verse right there. If you read chapter 5, he's talking about all these issues of responsibility, and sometimes the church takes the responsibility of a widow who is completely alone. He says, but if you have a widow in your house, don't make the church take care of her. You should take care of her. She's your mom. That's what he's saying. So he comes here and he says, and if you can't do that, it's like you've denied the faith. I mean, that's a huge statement. He's talking about responsibility. Nofel Staten, years ago, I think was the president of what's now Hope International University, was Pacific Christian College back in the day. On writing about this is how he says it. Listen to this. Children have no right to give this responsibility to the government or the church. Neither the government or the church got up at 3 a.m. when we were infants and our bodies were hot with fever. Neither the government nor the church watched us go to kindergarten. Neither the government or the church were there when we fell and got hurt. Neither the government or the church was there when the heart was crushed as a friendship fell apart. It was our parents. They were the ones who cared for us. They deserve our care in return. Even as I read that, I know some of your stories. And you're like, yeah, but my parent wasn't like that. But it might just be that you're now taking care of your parent, even though they weren't much of a parent to you, might be the thing that shows them Jesus. He just says, it's your responsibility. Take care of your family. And there's layers of that. But this one example is like if you have an aging person in the family, like take care of them. And I think maybe because it was Father's Day, I'm just reading through 1 Timothy a few times, and that just jumped out at me this time. Like there's a responsibility we have to family. Let me take a level deeper. There's some people in our church that I know are going through this. Like you are literally serving a family member by being a caretaker, by helping them through some stuff. And I remember 3 years ago, my wife was in the midst of that with her sister. And we lost her in November of that year. But for the bulk of a year, my wife was gone 3 to 6 days a week over in Anaheim taking care of her sister. And she loved her sister, but they weren't like super tight. Like they weren't going on vacations together. They weren't those kind of sisters, but she loved her. But when this happened and she saw her sister was in need, she's like, I need to take care of her. Like, absolutely. And then I got really used to her being gone. So then it was awkward when she came home. Like, she's always around. No, we did joke about that. But the honest truth is, I think I love my wife even more watching her take care of her sister, because it wasn't easy. And some of you are going through that right now. I'm just going to tell you, you are honoring your faith and the responsibility. You're letting Jesus show through your life. I actually had a conversation with somebody recently who said, I'm sorry, I just can't be involved in ministry at Lao. I'm taken care of, and it was somebody in their family. I'm like, that is ministry. That is ministry. You are being the hands and the feet of Jesus in that situation. And just because they're your family doesn't mean it's not ministry. Like that's powerful, and that's beautiful, and that's important, and that's a responsibility that he says we have to take and help whenever we can. That's responsibility. But I think there's a level of responsibility that goes on a more personal level too, and that's just that we are responsible for us. We're not responsible for everybody else. Some of you come from a highly dysfunctional family, so even just talking about family, sometimes you just get this grin on your face. You're like, you don't know my family. Nope, I don't. And I can't tell you that you're going to be able to make them or mold them in the way you think they need to get. It's like, but we are responsible for us. You know, how many times have I had that conversation with somebody going through a divorce? It's like, you can make massive changes right now. That's no guarantee that they're going to change. But you are responsible for you. So listen to this, 1 Timothy 4:12. I read it early. Here it is again. But don't worry about the age thing. Just see if it applies to you in some way. Don't let anyone look down on you because you're young or because you're old. I'm just going to add it. Here we go. But set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Just young or old, we would all do well to grow in the responsibility we have for our own life and our own actions. And then the last one comes up in chapter 6. I'm going to say it this way. He encourages stewardship. I'm not talking about giving to a church, okay? Don't hear that and you tune me out. I want you to listen to this. In fact, I was listening the other day and I heard this. This blew me away. If you're an old rocker like me, you maybe had mad respect for Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing, and I did, and I still love to listen to him play. He passed away this last year. And they had an auction, and there was several things from the band Van Halen and some things from Eddie's. Somehow somebody came up with one of his expired licenses, like license. And I don't know who had it. It wasn't like a family member. Somebody had it, and it was issued like in 1997 or whatever. And they put it in this auction, expecting to get maybe like $2,000. Like, first of all, who has Eddie Van Halen's license? How did they get it? And then who's going to pay money for a license from somebody, right? Well, he thought maybe he could get $2,000. He got $16,000. That's crazy to me. So I brought one of my old ones. This one was issued in 2010, and we're going to auction it off tonight, baby. Let's just start at $16,000. Do I have anybody? No, seriously, that's one of my old ones. But I heard that on the radio, and I was just like laughing, like that's crazy stuff. People use their money for crazy stuff, and I think what he gets at in 1 Timothy chapter 6 is, yeah, we can have fun with money. But let's not forget, money is a temporary resource that we can use to make an eternal impact. And as I read this, just listen and think, does the younger generation, the ones we're trying to encourage, the ones who are behind us in this journey, do they need to hear this one or what? Listen to this, 1 Timothy 6, beginning in verse 9. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Like, somebody needs to teach this one. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. You know, when it comes to encouraging stewardship in the next generation, like for a family, like a parent helping a kid, yes, we need to teach about the budget. We need to teach about the dangers of credit card debt. We need to teach them, but we need to teach them some of this stuff too. Like, you got to be careful. You can get sucked into this stuff, and it can draw you away from your relationship with Christ because it becomes your God. So we skip down later, and then this is something, I've always loved this passage. I spent like 5 weeks on these 3 verses one time. I love these verses. In 1 Timothy 6, beginning in verse 17, he says, command, this is strong, command those who are rich. Now, by the way, before you tune them out, you're rich compared to the vast majority of people on planet Earth. No, you are not paid the same as LeBron James. I get that. Neither am I. It takes me 2 weeks to make what he makes in a year. No, we can't even think in those terms, right? When we hear of somebody who makes multi-millions of dollars and they do, it's like our brain can't even comprehend that kind of stuff. But we're rich. So don't lose out on the lesson. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Like we can't enjoy these things. Listen though, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. It's like, are you willing to encourage that in the next generation so that they can take hold of the life that is truly life? Again, at Community, one of our passions, one of our goals is to make a difference in the community that we're a part of in this valley. And one of the ways that we do that is we partner with ministries who are in town. And maybe one of our favorites, I'm just going to say, you're not supposed to have favorites, but I do, is My City Youth Center. And Dan, if you would just make your way up here, that's the top secret thing here. I was trying to get these chairs ready for him to come up. So give Dan a hand. Grab that mic. I'm actually going to let him talk too. All right. So the reason I wanted him up here, because I think this is a cool kind of tying in of these two issues. So as a church, we invest time as well as money in My City Youth Center. In fact, some of you know this kind of stuff, but we invest in them $1,000 a month. Our church gives My City Youth Center $1,000 a month because we believe in what they're doing downtown in our community, okay? So maybe, Dan, it might be helpful. First of all, you're a great dad, a great grandpa, and a happy Father's Day to you too.
And to you.
Thank you. I was just waiting for that. Okay. All right, no. Well, tell us a little bit about the young people that you guys work with, minister to on a regular basis. Just give us a picture.
Well, most of our kids are living in a depressed atmosphere, financially nothing. We have a lot of kids that come in from our neighborhood, if you all know where we are over there. God put us in just the spot we needed to be. So these kids are hurting, and boy, today that place is full.
Yeah.
It's just awesome to see these kids having fun and, learning and playing basketball and everything else that they're doing. So
in a lot of these kids' cases, like there's not a father in the picture. And sometimes not a mother. And so you and your staff and your volunteers, you guys get to be these mentors, these like Paul to a Timothy. You get to be, we're not biological, but we're going to show you the love of Jesus. We're going to show you what it means to be a part of family. So anyway, I love what you guys do because of that and right where you are. Tell us a little bit about that.
On that note, we have this kid, TJ. He came in 2014 when we opened the doors of this youth center. And TJ was a problem all the time. And so he's now 18 years old. He came in last week. He's big, he's looking good, and all that. And he comes in and he's sitting in my office. And I said, TJ, this is the first time you've been in my office that you're not in trouble.
We were talking about this the other day. And I told him, I said, one of the reasons he comes back is because he respects you. If he would have let him run over him, he wouldn't have respected him, but he still respects and loves you because
I kicked him out a lot.
You did that. Yeah, that's right. What are some of the challenges, like your greatest challenges right now?
Well, our greatest challenges as we step forward in things, we've grown substantially. Our building is 5,300 square feet. And when we got there, I thought that was lots of room. We're going to be here for years. Within 2-3 years, we outgrew it, and we've used every square inch of that building. And we got about 300 kids that roll through that building a week. Now, that's not 300 separate kids, but 300 kids in the classes and stuff. And so we have no space, literally. And then on top of that, during COVID, we put on a food distribution thing. It started out just for the families that we were ministering to. And that started out with 30 people, and now we're at 300 or at 200 plus people, and we have like over almost 1,400 people listed on our list that have been coming and getting food in this valley.
Weekly.
So that's every week.
Every
2 days
week.
a week we have that. Yeah. We converted shipping containers into a refrigerator and storage. We've made a makeshift food system.
Yeah, so you guys remember just maybe a couple of months ago we said they desperately need those little plastic bags, and so
they're all gone.
Thousands of those. We need more. Anytime you want to bring plastic bags, you got something, just bring them, throw them in the lobby. We'll make sure they get them. So that's an ongoing thing. What's next for My City Youth Center? Like, what do you see happening here?
Well, we had a couple situations in our community recently. One was a year ago in July, somewhere around 4th of July. We had a young man 2 blocks away from us who was out playing basketball in a side yard in the apartment where they lived. And a drive-by shooter went by and shot both the boys that were playing, but this one boy, Tim, it went through his arm and into his chest and almost to his heart. And he survived. In fact, one of my board members, a younger guy, he was out walking around there, and he made a friendship with him. They're all playing ball together and talking to this boy. And he's anxious to get into our new building that we're getting ready to build, our My City Athletic Center. And he wants to get in there and play basketball where he's safe, and he wants to also get into boxing. So we're looking at several sports like that. And then the second one just happened 2 weeks ago. We have a young man. He came from Guatemala. At 14 years old, he got on a bus and came to the United States, spent a year in Texas in holding. And a family here in San Jacinto, one of our local churches, not adopted, but they're fostering him. And so he's been coming down. He wants to learn how to work. He's 18 now. He's just graduated high school. He's been with us for pretty much the whole year. And so he was walking home because somebody stole his bike. And a drive-by comes by. They start talking, what are you doing here, blah, blah, blah. They drive off, and they shot him. And he got shot in his left shoulder, in his arm there. And that's about the same place. I'm looking at what's happening in our valley with these kids. It's not safe to be young or old, really, but not safe to be young. You can't even ride your bike or walk down the street. So the need for somewhere safe, and we purchased land in 2019, and now we are starting to develop. We've got the renderings, all the preliminary work. We've had 20-foot holes drilled in there to get all the soils tests and surveyed and all that stuff. We're moving forward on a 12,000 square foot building. Sound familiar?
Yeah, I like it.
That happened here. So, and that's probably the biggest thing. It's like we've been able to raise all the money to get to the point where we will have a set of actual working plans ready to turn in for a permit. But that's a big one. And one more thing too, our food program, we had gotten a nice big fat donation, not a donation, a grant, that's the word, from the city, but they wouldn't let us buy a truck. We needed an 8-foot bed to haul double pallets of food and everything. And so they said, but you can rent one or lease one. So I had 4 months with it, so I rented one. It's costing us about $12,000. And at the end of this month, it's done, and we don't have a truck. So thank you, City of Hammett. Oh, I hope they don't see this.
Yeah. I'm going to send it to all
No,
of
I am
you.
very grateful for it, and Carly's not here. So
Yeah. So if you have access to, or somebody has a great truck that we could buy at a reasonable rate or whatever.
Or you can
we'd
even
love-
come and drive it for us.
Yeah, that'd be good. Let me say this, and then I'll wrap up this part. I told him the other day when we were meeting, I said, so we give you guys $1,000 a month because we really believe in what you're doing. Our budget runs July 1st through the next year, so we're ready to start a new budget. And so we just upped that to $1,500 a month. So now we're able to give $18,000 a year to you guys. So
Thank you.
we're excited.
Yeah.
And the reason we get to do that is because of you guys and your faithfulness. So we're not just talking about teach faithfulness and stewardship. Our church has been doing that. In fact, I got an extra check I didn't tell you about. Why don't you look at that?
Well,
Look
and I
at
want
that
to
one.
thank all you guys.
Yeah, and this is because while he's looking at that, this is because of you guys this year and what you did.
And for your prayers. Oh my gosh. $12,000.
Yeah.
That's what I spent on this truck. I thank you guys. Your prayers are coveted. You know, we're in a rough area. There's a lot of things, but God just keeps blessing this ministry. And our mommy shop that my wife runs is, I mean, I could tell stories all night about those kids.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
So this is cool. So anyway, our leaders, yeah, man, don't go anywhere. Our leaders were meeting this week. We're finalizing the budget last week, and we just said, you know, we have some extra money in our missions because of how generous our church was this year. So we met all of our other mission stuff, and we said, we have some extra money. Where does it need to go? And without even hesitating, all of us were like, My City Youth Center. Wow. And so an additional $12,000 on top of the $12,000 we gave you guys this year,
Thank you.
just because we love you and we appreciate what you're doing. So we have a bunch of people from our church who volunteer there, who help there.
And we need
Some of you
more.
are on staff there, and can always use more. So if you want to talk to Dan afterwards, you can. But we didn't talk about this. Well, I'm going to have him stay with me for communion. We're going to do communion now. And if you would like to, just kind of quietly go get those emblems and just come on back to your seat. You can go get them now. There's 2 cups together, bread in the bottom, juice in the cup. And if somebody would get a couple for us, we would appreciate that too. We could do it that way. Bring us a couple of those. Can you bring us 2 sets? Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah, so while you're doing that, I had a couple more verses I was going to look at, but we're not going to get to those. I just want to spend some time preparing our hearts for communion. And I thought it'd be kind of cool. I already had Dan up here. I'm going to have Dan do this with me, and we're going to pray each for the bread and for the juice. But the reason we take communion is exactly the reason why Timothy was sent, or why Timothy was sent to the church at Ephesus. It's to keep them on point. It's like don't let them get distracted by these other things and these other religious ideas and these other lies. It's like, no, stay true and faithful to the message. That message that Paul traveled more than 10,000 miles to share. That message, like stay true to that. And communion brings us back to that message every single week. The message is not work harder. The message is Jesus gave his life for us. And the reason we want to work hard, the reason we want to serve, the reason we want to give, the reason we want to do all this is because of what he's done for us, not because we're trying to get his attention. We already have his attention. He loves us. And so if you would, maybe just take that bread right now. And Dan, if you would, just kind of pray over that bread for us, then we'll take it together.
Father, we are so grateful for the sacrifice that you made through your Son, Jesus Christ. And Lord, for that body that was torn apart and ripped apart for my sins and all of our sins, Lord. There's no way we can ask or repay you for that, Father. But we're grateful that you have done that for us. And so, Lord, as we take this bread, I just pray that our hearts would be humbled before you, Lord, knowing that it cost you your life for us.
Let's take that together. And holding that cup, let me pray. God, we thank you for your blood. Unbelievable that you love us this much, that you would shed your blood for us. God, that's a message that people need to hear. We're grateful we've already heard it and we know you, and there's somebody else that needs to hear it this week. So God, as we take this, as we remember what you did for us, God, send us on mission again this week to go share this good news, this message that Paul traveled all over the place telling. Let us be willing to travel all over our valley to tell it. So thank you, God, for your sacrifice. In Jesus' name we pray. Let's take the